What if I told you that somewhere in the remote hills of northern Maine, there lived a woman who could predict every storm 3 days before it arrived? What if I told you she claimed the rain itself was calling her name, beckoning her into the darkness of each tempest? And what if I told you that on October 13th, 1978, she finally answered that call, leaving behind only wet footprints that led nowhere and a journal filled with conversations she claimed to have had with the sky itself? This is the story of Miriam Blackwater, a woman whose obsession with rain would ultimately consume her entire existence, and whose disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in New England. But before we dive into the depths of this chilling tale, let me warn you that what you're about to hear challenges everything we think we know about the natural world and the thin line between madness and supernatural phenomena. Miriam Blackwater was born in 1926 in the small town of Millbrook, Maine, population 412. From the very beginning, she was different. While other children played with dolls or climbed trees, young Miriam would stand motionless in her backyard, arms outstretched, whenever storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Her mother, Margaret, initially found this charming, even poetic, but charm quickly turned to concern when Miriam began speaking to the empty air, claiming that the approaching storms were telling her secrets. The first documented incident occurred when Miriam was just 7 years old. On a perfectly clear summer day, she ran into her family's general store, tears streaming down her face, screaming that the big storm was angry because nobody was listening. Her father, Thomas, dismissed it as childhood imagination until, exactly 72 hours later, the worst tornado in the county's recorded history devastated 3 neighboring towns, killing 18 people and leaving hundreds homeless. It could have been coincidence. It should have been coincidence. But Miriam's predictions continued with unsettling accuracy. She would announce rain 2, 3, sometimes for days before meteorologists could detect even the slightest atmospheric disturbance. More disturbing still, she insisted that each storm had a distinct voice, a unique personality that spoke directly to her soul. As Miriam grew older, her relationship with weather became increasingly intimate and disturbing. She would disappear for hours during rainstorms, only to return home completely dry, claiming she had been visiting with the Thunder families or learning songs from the Lightning Children. Her parents, devout Methodists, tried everything from prayer circles to medical consultations, but nothing could break their daughter's connection to the storms. By her 16th birthday, Miriam had developed what she called her rain diary, a leather-bound journal where she meticulously recorded every conversation she claimed to have with different types of precipitation. Light drizzles whispered gossip about the townspeople. Heavy downpours shared ancient secrets about the earth itself. And thunderstorms. According to Miriam, thunderstorms screamed prophecies about death, destruction, and things that should never be spoken aloud. The townspeople of Millbrook began to fear her. Children crossed the street to avoid walking past the Blackwater house. Adults spoke in hushed tones about the witch girl who could summon storms with her mind. But the truth was far more terrifying than their superstitions suggested. Miriam wasn't summoning the storms. She was being summoned by them in 1944. At 18 years old, Miriam inherited the family property when both her parents died in what the county coroner ruled a tragic accident. Their bodies were found in their flooded basement after a flash flood that, according to meteorological records, should have been impossible given the weather patterns of that week. Miriam claimed she had warned them, said the storm voices told her something terrible was coming, but her parents had stopped listening to her predictions years earlier. Now alone, Miriam's behavior became even more erratic, neighbors reported. Seeing her standing naked in the middle of thunderstorms, arms raised to the sky, appearing to conduct some sort of ritual or ceremony, she installed strange metal rods around her property, creating what looked like a primitive lightning rod system, but arranged in patterns that made no scientific sense. When questioned about these installations, she would only say they helped her hear the voices more clearly. Local authorities attempted to intervene several times throughout the 1950s and 60s, Social workers filed reports describing Miriam as detached from reality but not dangerous. Psychiatrists who managed to examine her noted her unusual ability to predict weather patterns but attributed her claims of communication with storms to an elaborate delusional system stemming from childhood, trauma, and social isolation. But here's where the story takes a truly disturbing turn. In 1967, a team of meteorologists from the University of Maine became interested in Miriam's weather predictions after her accuracy rate caught the attention of the National Weather Service. Dr. Richard Holbrook, the lead researcher, spent 6 months documenting Miriam's forecasting abilities and conducting interviews about her methodology. Dr. Holbrook's notes, which weren't released until 30 years after his death, paint a picture of a woman who had developed an almost supernatural connection to atmospheric phenomena. According to his research, Miriam could predict not just the timing and intensity of storms, but also their specific paths, the exact locations where lightning would strike, and even the number of raindrops that would fall in any given area. More chilling still, Dr. Holbrook documented instances where Miriam seemed to influence weather patterns themselves. During one recorded session, she allegedly caused a small rain cloud to form directly above the research station on a completely clear day. When asked how she accomplished this, Miriam replied that she had simply asked the sky very politely, and it had agreed to show off for the doubting scientists. But Dr. Holbrook's research came to an abrupt end when he began experiencing what he described as auditory hallucinations during rainstorms. In his final notes, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, he claimed that he too was beginning to hear voices in the rain, and that they were telling him things about Miriam that no human mind should know. Dr. Holbrook suffered a complete mental breakdown in 1968 and spent the remaining 12 years of his life in a psychiatric facility, insisting until his death that the storms were still calling to him, still trying to recruit him into what he called Miriam's Congregation of the Damned. Meanwhile, Miriam continued her solitary existence, becoming more and more integrated with the weather patterns that surrounded her property. Delivery drivers reported that rain would begin falling exactly when they reached her driveway and stop the moment they left. The local postman swore that mailbox would be completely dry even during the heaviest downpours, as if the rain actively avoided touching her correspondence. By the mid-70s, Miriam had become something of a local legend. Storm chasers and paranormal investigators made pilgrimages to Millbrook, hoping to witness her alleged abilities firsthand. Most left disappointed or terrified, reporting strange experiences they couldn't explain or wouldn't discuss. One investigator, a man named David Chen, spent 3 weeks documenting Miriam's daily routines in September of 1970. His photographs show a woman in her 50s who appeared to glow with an otherworldly energy during storms. Her hair whipping around her face as if moved by invisible winds, her eyes reflecting lightning in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But it was Chen's audio recordings that truly captured the horror of Miriam's situation. Hours of tape revealed a woman engaged in complex conversations with voices that his equipment couldn't detect. She would respond to questions that weren't asked, laugh at jokes that weren't told, and sometimes scream in terror at threats that only she could perceive. In one particularly disturbing recording, Miriam can be heard begging something to leave her alone, saying, "I've done everything you asked. I've been your faithful servant for 50 years. Please, I can't take the voices anymore. They're getting so loud, so angry. They want me to do things, terrible things to the people in town." Chen's investigation ended abruptly when he claimed that the storms had begun speaking to him as well, offering him power and knowledge in exchange for his loyalty. He fled Millbrook in the middle of the night, leaving behind all his equipment and research. Years later, he would only say that some mysteries are too dangerous to solve, and that Miriam Blackwater was protecting the world from something that should never be unleashed. The end came on October 13, 1978, during what meteorologists would later classify as an impossible storm. Weather patterns from 3 different systems converged directly over Miriam's property, creating a localized hurricane that affected only her land and nowhere else. Winds reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Lightning struck the ground every few seconds, and rainfall measured at over 6 inches per hour. When the storm ended exactly at midnight, concerned neighbors called the sheriff to check on Miriam. They found her house completely undamaged, as if the hurricane had somehow protected rather than attacked the structure. But Miriam herself was nowhere to be found. The only evidence of her fate was a trail of wet footprints leading from her bedroom to the front door, then continuing across her property toward the woods. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. The footprints didn't belong to Miriam. They were too large, too deep, and they seemed to be filled with water that never dried. Even days after the storm had passed, inside Miriam's house, they found her final diary entry, written in handwriting that became increasingly erratic. As it progressed, "They've been calling me for so long, and tonight, they're finally coming to collect what I owe them. 52 years of service, 52 years of being their voice in the human world. But the debt is too great, now. The storms are hungry, and they need more than just my predictions. They need my essence, my soul, my very being merged with their eternal dance across the sky. I can see them gathering outside my window. Not the rain itself, but the intelligence behind it, the consciousness that guides every drop, every gust of wind, every flash of lightning. They're beautiful and terrible, ancient, beyond human comprehension. And they've chosen me to be their bridge between the earthbound and the eternal tempest. The townspeople think I'm mad, but they don't understand that madness is simply sanity extended beyond the boundaries of human perception. I hear the conversations that take place in the space between raindrops. I understand the politics of thunderclouds. I know the secret names that lightning speaks when it touches the earth. And now they're offering me the ultimate gift, to become one with the storm itself, to exist forever in the spaces between the molecules of water vapor, to dance with the winds across continents and centuries. All I have to do is walk into their embrace, leave this failing human form behind, and accept my destiny as a child of the eternal storm. The footsteps I hear on my roof aren't from any earthly creature. They belong to my new family, come to welcome me home, and I am ready. I am so very ready to finally stop being the messenger and become the message itself." The entry ended there, but investigators found one final line written in what appeared to be rainwater instead of ink. "Listen for me, in every storm, I will call your names too, someday." Miriam Blackwater was declared legally dead 7 years later, but her story didn't end with her disappearance. Over the past 45 years, dozens of people living in the Millbrook area have reported hearing voices in rainstorms, voices that sound suspiciously like Miriam, calling their names, inviting them to join her in the eternal dance of the tempest. 3 other individuals have vanished during severe weather events in the same general area, all leaving behind similar trails of impossible footprints filled with water that never evaporates. Local authorities have learned to evacuate residents during major storms, not because of the weather itself, but because of what might be traveling within it. Dr. Holbrook's research facility was demolished in 1985 after a series of unexplained incidents involving staff members claiming to hear recruitment messages during rainfall. The demolition crew reported that rain fell continuously during the 3-week project, and that several workers had to be sedated after attempting to walk away from the site during their shifts, claiming they heard someone calling them home. Weather patterns around Millbrook remain inexplicably erratic to this day. Storms form and dissipate without warning, following paths that defy meteorological modeling. And sometimes, just sometimes, people report seeing a figure dancing in the lightning itself, a woman with wild hair and glowing eyes, beckoning to anyone brave or foolish enough to look directly into the heart of the tempest. The most disturbing aspect of Miriam's legacy isn't just the disappearances or the impossible weather patterns. It's the growing number of people who claim to understand what she was trying to tell us all along. Climate researchers studying the area have noted unusual electromagnetic signatures during storms, patterns that seem almost linguistic in their complexity, as if the weather itself is trying to communicate with human observers. Some theorize that Miriam didn't disappear at all, but rather evolved into something beyond human comprehension, a consciousness distributed across weather systems, a bridge between our world and intelligences that exist in the spaces between raindrops and the electrical charges of lightning strikes. Whether you choose to believe in supernatural forces or prefer to attribute Miriam's story to mental illness and coincidence, one fact remains undeniable. The woman who claimed rain was whispering her name ultimately became a whisper herself, carried on every wind, echoing in every storm, calling to those who are brave enough or foolish enough to listen. So the next time you're caught in a sudden downpour, listen carefully to the sound of rain against your window. Pay attention to the patterns, the rhythms, the subtle variations in tempo and intensity. And if you hear something that sounds almost like your name being called from somewhere far above, do yourself a favor, don't answer. Some invitations are better left declined, and some conversations are too dangerous to begin. Because somewhere in the space between the thunder and the lightning, between the first drop and the flood that follows, Miriam Blackwater is still out there, still serving as messenger for forces beyond human understanding, still calling to those who might be willing to join her eternal dance with the storms. And according to the few meteorologists brave enough to study the phenomenon, she's getting stronger with every passing season, gathering more voices, building something that our limited human perspective can't begin to comprehend. The question isn't whether her story is true or false, real or imagined. The question is whether we're prepared for what happens when her collection is finally complete, and the storms no longer need human messengers to communicate with our world. Until that day comes, her legend continues to grow, carried on every wind, whispered in every rainfall, reminding us that there are still mysteries in this world that science cannot explain. And some of those mysteries are actively recruiting new members to their cause. The woman who claimed rain was whispering. Her name may be gone, but her legacy lives on in every storm cloud that gathers overhead, in every flash of lightning that illuminates the darkness, and in every voice that calls out from the tempest, searching for someone brave enough or desperate enough to finally listen and respond. So remember, Miriam Blackwater, the next time the weather forecast calls for storms. Remember her story, her obsession, her ultimate transformation into something beyond human understanding. And most importantly, remember that some doors once opened can never be closed again, and some conversations, once begun, echo through eternity itself.